Hey everyone, this little video is going to show you the process of motor vehicle body repair. I'm fortunate enough to have that skill set, having been formally trained in the subject and having been formally trained in paint respraying. Now, I recently was mug enough to damage my tailgate on my Golf Mark 7, and this video is going to show you that damage and how to repair it. It's quite a procedure and it's a skill set which as I say, I'm really pleased to have. I think real practical skill sets are what's really lacking in this country at the moment. Of course, everyone leaves school and goes off to university and they all know about media studies or geography, but yeah, we're not making anything in this country anymore, so some skill sets would come in handy. Have a look at this, see what you think. Yeah, so here's the rather serious damage to the tailgate. The rear view camera is now jammed, and this damage very nearly smashed the rear lamps in as well. Anyway, let's set about repairing it because, you know, the lenses were saved and undamaged, and when I remove all the inner tailgate panels, I can free up the crease that's preventing the reversing camera from operating. Obviously, you have to remove all the plastic trim from the inside of the tailgate, but it's kind of a worst case scenario because you can see all those strengthener panels, which makes it really inaccessible to get any block behind there. But yeah, the whole process of working the creases to try and get the panel lifted back out to its original shape is made really much more difficult in this instance because they're all blind panels. There's strengthener panels right the way along that crease, and in order to panel beat a crease out, one needs to get a metal block directly behind the damage. So even with the specialist tools I've got, it's a little bit difficult to get behind this and planish it out really flat. This time lapse shows me doing just that though, and as you can see, we've got the shape of the panel back. The camera's working again, and you can see these little stitches, as I call them, where I've been able to get something behind the panel and pull it back into shape roughly. Needs a lot more fettling before I can call that the best I can do, but all the way along these dents, it's completely inaccessible from the inside. So I'm using little tools that I've got to try and get behind. That what you see now is about as good as it gets because you just cannot get behind that panel. Very nearly caught the lens, didn't it? Very nearly smashed the camera. Very nearly smashed the VW. So here we are. Let's strip it all out now and really take on the actual repair of the surface. And that's grinding back all the paint. Obviously, you can only apply filler to bare metal. And we'll use a smooth filler and feather that in to cover the repair. As you saw, it was quite a deep dent right underneath the camera, and so that's the main thing I'm trying to sort of feather in and make back into shape. It's a good job we've got time lapse because this is a good few hours work just getting this primed up. But there it is, primed up, and heavily primed up as well. As you'll see, I call it plastering. So now that's fully prepared and primed and flatted, I'm just gonna prepare the parts of the panels that you need to feather into. So although I'm only painting up to here, I'll key in this area and paint up to the windscreen so I can blend the colour in because we don't want a hard edge. I'll mask this off because this is such a great big break. We can get away with it even if it's a little bit of a shade out. But down here I might have to dust it in. But this is something modern painters just never do now. They just go edge to edge, and if it's a shade out, so be it. I'm going to mix the paint up after I've masked up and prepared the surrounding panels, which I want to feather into. And after a little bit of masking, I'll put this on time lapse to save a lot of time. More time lapse here as I flatted down the very thick coat of primer, and it's always best to leave the primer overnight so it will breathe, otherwise you get little solvent pop holes all over it. But yeah, I'm going to mask this right up, and I've managed to get the paint ordered now, and the replacement paint has got a specific code. Mixing the paint and getting things ready, putting a metallic nozzle on my JGA 500, setting the air pressure, and here goes the first dust coat. We'll gradually build that up. The worst thing one can do in painting is to keep piling paint on. It's called a flash off time. You must let each layer of paint dry off thoroughly, and it dries off pretty quick when it's 1-to-1 base coat. This is going to be lacquered after the colour's gone on. So there's the first base coat gone on, 1-to-1 with metallic tungsten silver. But as is usual, when you even follow the code, the paint codes on the car, and even if you do a spray out pattern, there's not much you can tell about what's going to actually happen until you put the paint on, shade wise. Well, now on this job I've got a different shade. On the flip tone it's different. On the flip tone it looks slightly different. On the face tone it looks darker. Obviously workshop lighting isn't great, but as I said when I started, what I always do is to try and blend the colour anyway. So I've masked up to this line and put a base colour on the repair. Now I'm going to remask up to the screen and the edge of the panel, and just key this area in very lightly, and then just dust the colour into this panel, and then that should blend a little better than a straight line. You'll see this change now as the 2-plaque lacquer goes on top. And that gives us a good idea of where we are on colour now. Lots of nice straight lines which give you a good visual break, so it's an easy blend to do really on a Golf. So there we are. I've based up the actual repair area, and then the full base coat and full lacquer, and then unmask and remask up to the next panel and into the windscreen, which gives me a bit of room to feather in because it was like a shade out. That's something that modern painters are either incapable of or just can't be bothered to do. They call it edge-to-edge finishing these days, and that's what you get whether you've got a Porsche or a 61 Mini. I just want to demonstrate what an edge-to-edge finish is. You can see this is much darker. It's like 2 shades darker than that, and it needed to be flicked into this panel, so that would have involved masking this door below the swage line down to that line. Natural breaks there, you could have just dusted that in, but no, it's an edge-to-edge finish. So anyway, having blended that colour, which was slightly out, and the reason, the way to do that is to change the viscosity of the mix, change the air pressure at the nozzle of the gun, change the fan position, and do various spray outs until you get it. I've got a couple of little glitches, but the whole thing, the whole car is going to get mopped over anyway now. I'll do another clip in the ordinary daylight when I've mopped it. That's another thing that a lot of painters don't realise, that there's metameric lighting from artificial street lighting, that something that might look fantastic in a body shop under fluorescent lighting, sometimes in daylight and sunlight or street lamps light, looks like 3 shades out. So we'll have a look at it when it's outside. I'm going to give it a flatten, maybe a polish, but maybe a flattened polish. It goes without saying, before you can do any successful panel beating or paint repairs, you need to be organised. As you can see, I've got all my DA discs here in order, and various different boxes with different grits and different styles, Velcro or self-adhesive. I got that up to 240 grit before I got priming, and then I primed and flatted it with 400. So we're going for a smooth surface to give you the shine and the finish and to help you blend. So after you've done the base coat and lacquered it, then you're going to get on to polishing once the lacquer's completely dried. And there are so many different grades. You can now get DA pads that go up to 1500, 3800. 1500 is what I'll probably start with on this lacquer, because I think that's just suitable. So I'll be going old school with wet and dry stuff like this. So I'll need a water sprayer, a nice clean rag, and a bucket of soapy water. This is the variable speed polisher I'll be using today, not my full size one, because these small head ones will be ideal for a small repair like on the tailgate repair that you've just seen me do. These come in different grades of course. You know, you go from firm, less firm, soft, very soft and finish. And you can see there's a difference in these pads. These let a little bit of water through to release the soap off the surface. These are more for compounding when you really want to hit the surface. So I'll be using some compound. Again, being organised is absolute key. And the different compounds I keep in a separate box. So, got to keep these dry, and products like Final Glaze and products like G3 for regular compound. These are the various stages of cutting you'll go through to get a glass finish. And people who work in the optical trades will know all about polishing lenses. There's no difference when you want to get a showroom finish to a paint repair. So yeah, those are a few of the things we'll need. Being organised is key. Here is my bucket of soapy water, and I mean a clean bucket of soapy water, because 1 grain of sand in there could cause a line as long as your arm's movement and cause you to have to paint the whole thing again. Not one bit of grit can be in that. It's got to be a clean bowl of water. So that's the kit ready to go. Let's start the job. We've wet flatted that paint, that lacquer, with 1500 grit, and if you keep dousing it with water, obviously the water is going to be like the shine you're going to get, so you can pretty much keep gauging where you're going with a film of water. But that's the sort of denibbing you can see, and where I feather into the existing panel, lighter and lighter, leaving it to feather in with the colour and everything else. And it shows up little discrepancies which you wouldn't have noticed. There's a beginnings of a run there which I need to flat out, but as ever, you wouldn't have noticed it unless you denibbed it. You can see a couple of shallows and a couple of little separations, I think. But overall, that's taken the nibs off the orange peel. So we could get a glass finish by compounding that now with G3 or G4 compound, followed by a nice polish on a variable speed sander. However, to finish it off, I'm going to start with the 3000 grit now. I use these discs because they're just so much finer and easier to deal with than the square sheets. 3000 wet and dry. That ensures that I can focus on these little places without actually going through. This is going to be a final little flick over, and then it'll be out with the polishers. Vital, as I say, to keep everything really spotlessly clean when you're doing this. One piece of grit in the water bucket or on the compound that you're using, and all you would do is put a huge swirl mark into that lacquer. The lacquer's obviously dried overnight, so it's hard enough to take a knock, but you can easily ruin it with one big piece of grit. So hygiene is all important on the whole procedure. So that's been mopped over with G3 and rinsed off, and it's a bit of a balancing act. So the flip tone colour has lightened up because now it's letting more light, bouncing more light around because it's got a smooth surface. But this is a very disappointing repair which I couldn't get a dolly behind, and it's an older car, and so it's really not worth going any further than I have really. In a couple of days, if I notice it needs something else, I might get back to it, but it's basically knocked into shape. And yeah, that's the procedure of how to repair and paint a tailgate on a Golf Mark 7. And the final test, of course, is to rinse it all off and put it out in the daylight and see how it looks in ordinary light rather than the workshop lighting. And you can see that colour's matched in fine. As I said, there's lots of nice straight lines and visual breaks on a Golf, so an easy one to blend really. Although it was a difficult repair to make, paint wise that's quite an easy one to blend. But yeah, that's looking acceptable for an older car, and I think I'm going to call it a day with that really. I hope you enjoyed that little film, because it is such a procedure, isn't it? And it's the same procedure if someone scratched a panel with a key or it's just a tiny dent. This is the sort of procedure that's got to be carried out in any event. Once something needs to be repainted, this is what's involved, and it's quite a long drawn out procedure, and it's a procedure that has to be followed. And these Dent Magic guys have all kinds of little magnetic gizmos to get behind those blind panels, and they're pretty good as well. I did consider doing that as a profession once, but I don't have all the magnetic dollies, and so that was the best I could do with it. Anyway, there we are. Hope you enjoyed this film, and I'm glad I've got my Golf Mark 7 back in one piece.